Most anglers don't realize how versatile a jig is. Not only is it an all-season lure, but it catches big bass. This week, Stacy King's going to take us to South Texas to show us his jig techniques. Rick Klun is going to show us how angling pressure affects the fish and how we should target them. I'm going to take you smallmouth fishing with my favorite lure, a spinnerbait. I'm going to teach you how to customize that bait to make it the very best it can be for these bronze beauties. I absolutely love throwing spinnerbaits for smallmouth. Look at that guy. But there's a few things you need to do to your spinnerbait to make it more effective when you're fishing for these brown fish. Speed is critical. What a fish. I need a spinnerbait I can reel fast, so I'm going to use double willow blades so I can reel it faster. Another thing is I usually downsize the rear blade. I stole the 4.5, a little one size smaller blade, and put it on the back of it. That allows me a faster retrieve and it'll keep the bait down in the water. Another thing is I'll just trim the main body of that skirt just a little bit shorter, right down almost to the back of the main hook. That's a smaller target for the fish to hit. And always, always have that trailer hook on there. That is a monster. The key for that is you're keeping it up where it's against the surface and they can't get as good a look at it. There's nothing better than that right there. But with it up high like that, they're looking up at it against that surface and the wave action and the ripples that are there. I've got a nice bright color today. I'm throwing a chartreuse and white because of the sky conditions that we have. You know, if it was sunny, they can get a lot better look at it. So I'll use a much more natural color and you're gonna get a lot more flash off the blades. But right now, under these conditions, I wanna keep that bait moving fast, just right underneath the surface, you know, right in the tops of these little waves. The wavier it gets, the more important it is to keep that bait up there right in the top of the waves. What a fish. There's a good one right there. Oh my gosh. He just annihilated it. When you're reeling that spinnerbait in, I'm not just burning it steady. I'm stopping it and starting it. You got to give those fish a reason to think that they can come a long ways to hit it and actually get it. They may be 8, 10, 12 feet deep, and they want to decide whether they can come up there and hit what you're showing them. If that spinnerbait's stopping and starting and twitching and jerking, it looks like it's got something wrong with them. And these guys right here, they cannot handle erratic movements out of the bait. There it is. I knew he'd be there someplace. When you're catching smallies like this on spinnerbaits, it is not a light tackle affair. I mean, that's another big one. I'm throwing a 6', 10" my own signature series spinning rod, 17-pound test mono, and a high speed of 7-to-1 reel. You got to be able to make long casts, and you need to be able to burn that spinnerbait back to the boat. Look at that guy. Sharp hooks, you know, you make a 50-yard cast with the wind on a day like today, and one hits it after 2 turns of 2 cranks, you got to be able to hook that fish and keep them coming. Got it. Golly, just annihilated it. I'm trying to stack the odds in my favor by fishing where the wind is at. Especially with smallmouth, they love to get along sandbars and drop-offs, and if you got the wind blowing, it just helps make your job a lot easier. You don't have to cover a whole flat. I try to have the boat position so my lure's in the strike zone for the maximum amount of the cast. So I'm going to throw right down these edges, kind of at a pretty steep angle, quartering and throwing across and right down it so that my bait is almost right over the top of those fish through the whole cast. That way they get the maximum amount of time to see it and come up and hit it. Speed is critical. Keep that bait moving fast, right underneath the surface, stopping and starting and twitching and jerking. Stout rod, stout line. Big. There's no such thing as a magic lure, but a jig is one of those that every angler has to have in his box. It's so versatile, you can fish it any time of the year, and it's a great big bass catcher. Stacy King's going to take us in depth this week with a jig and show us his techniques.
Oh, I mean, that's a real big one. Gosh. Oh. Golly gee. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna let you get this for me, Terry, if we ever... Look at that, look at the size of that fish. That's a giant. That's an absolute giant. I just cannot believe all the cover in this lake. It's just beautiful. No wonder it's such a bass factory. We've come down here to try a little late summer, early autumn structure fishing. That's the fish are still on their summer patterns pretty much. There's a lot of fish in these trees. Some of them are suspended, some of them are on the bottom. And there's a lot of fish out on the ledges and the high spots and the points out off these trees. And Terry and I are trying to move around through these trees this morning and catch a few pitching big creature baits and jigs and stuff like that around in the trees. And then we've caught some pretty nice ones already. And then there's one. Oh, come out of there, baby. I got him up. There he comes. Oh, yeah, that's what I was talking about. But we're trying to catch some good ones out here, and we've caught a couple of real nice ones so far, and hopefully we're going to get some bigger ones.
You see that old hardwood over there?
You bet, you bet.
All right. This lake here, even though we got tons of brush around the boat, them hardwoods are hard to beat, and they nearly always have a fish on them. You don't fish in this lake, you never pass one of those up.
That's just like fishing anywhere else. I mean, you find, you find something a little bit different.
A little bit different.
And he was in there too. He was right in there. Boy, I mean, come here.
You can help.
Nah. He was right where you told me he was going to be. I'm telling you, you called that shot. Look at that.
That was a call shot, wasn't it?
Ouch. Okay, I'm gonna turn her back here. Get back down there, pretty fish. All right. It's always important to me as I'm fishing down a tree row or any type area to find a subtle change. And the reason for that, there may be a bottom change, the water may be a little bit deeper there, it may be a little bit shallower, but you may see a little indentation, a little pocket in the trees, or you may see a little point coming out. If you have an isolated tree out on that little point, you may have 1 or 2 foot different change in the depth, and that's what's going to attract those bass. They're going to be around that single isolated piece of cover on that little old point. People ask me all the time about what color jig do you use in what situations. You know, watercolor determines that to me. It's the most important factor. You know, in real clear water, I like subtle colors like the brown crawdads, greens, and pumpkin colors. And if I get in a little more stained water situations, I'm going to go to darker colors like black and blue. And then if it really gets muddy on me, I may be using a black and chartreuse, a green and chartreuse, or something like that. Something bright that they can see. So it's real important to be looking at the water, seeing what that color is, and match your jig color to it. One thing that's real important to remember when you're fishing this way, you're really trying to fish vertical down through these branches. Basically all you're doing is flipping or pitching, but we're doing it out here in 10, 12, 14 foot of water. And you pitch your bait in there and you peel off line off your reel like this and get it down to the bottom. And when it hits the bottom, then you take up slack and shake it a few times. There he is. Oh, that's a good one. Whoa, see what I mean? See?
Oh, no.
Oh, stout. Yeah. See what I was saying about peeling that line off and letting that thing fall vertical? When it hits the bottom, tighten up on it, shake it a little bit, and be ready, because that's what's going to happen to you. You've got to remember that you need to use a fairly heavy weight when you're doing this. You know, I'm using a Texas rig here, and I'm using a 1/2 ounce weight, but a lot of times I'll even go up to a 3/4 or 1 ounce. You want a vertical presentation. You want that bait going down through that tree fast. Sometimes that's what triggers a strike.
Sometimes, Stacy, you can throw that jig in there and, you know, you get one of these old trees, you just know one's in, you can hop that bait real hard like this. Really, really make it hop.
He's there. Oh.
Yeah. Oh. Not much size to that one, Mr. Stacy.
A jig is something that every angler needs to master. I was fishing a tournament this summer at Kentucky Lake, fishing a spot with a crankbait and not having any success. I picked up a black and blue jig just like this one right here. First cast, I get an 8-pound bite. At the end of the day, I'm leading the tournament. That's why you have to master a jig, because it'll catch him when other baits won't, and it's such a big fish lure.
That is a big dude. Man.
Oh, he's back in that tree.
There he is. Oh man, what a fish.
Get in there, Stacy. It might be another one in there. Oh, he's having fun.
He does not want to quit, does he?
That's what's been in this area, that side. Woo!
Man, what a bass. What a bass. Tell them why that jig's so good, Terry, and how do you rig it, and what kind of knot do you use to tie it on with?
First, the knot, it's an improved clinch. I go through once, hold that part of it, go through the second time, that makes a loop. And I hold that, hold the loop, and I go around the main line 3 times, back through the loop, the double loop, and then back through the loop you just made.
That's just like a Berkeley knot, only you go through one more time than a Berkeley.
Right.
Yeah, that's what.
And I've never had that knot slip with braid.
It won't slip. A lot of guys use Palomar.
Palomar.
I use Palomar, but I see how that could probably be as good or better.
It really works good. This is the jig I make. Of course, the screw lock I invented years ago. This is a neat little deal we came up with to put the skirt on the jig. This is, I think, a number 10 or a number 11 knitting needle, old aluminum knitting needle. And you need to lubricate it with something. Go through the center of that skirt, the long side on this side of the skirt, all the little legs out of the way. You're going to bring that hook through that slot that you cut with the Dremel tool.
Slide the jig
Push
right
it up
in
till
there.
it hits the collar, and then you just pop it in. And that gets the skirt over the spring without screwing it up.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Then the trailer, thread it on. Usually about an inch, a little over an inch, inch and a half. When it gets to the screw lock, you have to screw it. A lot of people push it and it won't hold anything, it just rips a worm. You have to screw it and tuck this under every time. Use about 3 turns, it'll screw up on there, and it's actually stronger than the plastic. They'll pull the bait in 2 before they pull it off there. No super glue, no nothing,
Yep.
it's there.
That's great.
Then the rattle part, this is something we came up with for fishing the grass, but it works just as good in the brush. I've got a little wire loop on the end of that rattle, and I slide a couple of them on there.
Do you feel that rattle is real critical in the grass, especially, Terry?
Oh, I don't never fish without it.
In the grass, especially.
We lost this bottle yesterday, and I about went into convulsions.
Well, that's great. Well, that shows the folks how to rig that jig up, and I know it catches lots of big bass for you.
Yep.
When I come up on a big old tree like this, a big old bushy bush out there, I mean, I look at that thing and I mean, that's a bass condominium. There's gonna be a bass or more than one bass in that tree somewhere. There's several different ways that people like to fish them, but the way I like to do it is to ease up on it from the downwind side so that the wind doesn't blow you in on top of it, and then I'll start picking it apart from the sides. I'll start fishing the sides first and gradually work in, and then drop one right in the very heart of the tree last. Some guys think they want to go into the heart of the tree first, and they think maybe they'll catch the biggest bass that's in there if they'll do that. But to me, if you'll start on the outside edge, work your way in, you may pick off 2 or 3 fish that's in that tree before you ever get into the heart of it, and still get in there and catch the biggest one. So that's the way I like to do it, and it seems to work out real good. By doing all this, I'm going to determine exactly where the fish is positioned and find myself a good solid pattern. Once you've determined this pattern, you've determined that that fish is on the outside edge, the middle, or down right next to the base of the tree, then you can move right on to the next tree and use the same thing, and it saves you so much time. That's the whole theory in determining a pattern. You want to make sure that every cast or pitch that you make goes into the optimum area where you feel that fish is holding.
Oh, that's a giant. Man, he's pulling drag.
That's a catfish.
That can't be a catfish. I'm gonna let you get this for me, Terry, if we ever... Look at that, look at the size of that fish. That's a giant. That's an absolute giant.
I guarantee you that might be a shearlunker there.
Hurry up, get it. Get it. I mean, that is a giant fish. How much does that baby weigh? I've never seen a bass that big.
How about that one?
Look at that. Man, can you believe that fish? That's the biggest one I've ever caught in my life. The biggest one I've ever
Now
caught.
you're looking for real estate.
Okay.
11.8. No, 11.2.
I think she weighs 11 pounds, 2 ounces. That's the biggest one I've ever caught. I'm gonna release her back. Isn't she beautiful? There she goes. Oh, woo. Man.
Good food.
It's great.
I think you broke the scale.
Oh man, what big fun. A lot of guys get discouraged when they pick up a rod with a jig on it. You know, to me, it's the best big bass bait there is, and it catches lots of fish. Don't get discouraged. Be patient. Try it under different conditions, different situations. You'll find out that you'll eventually start catching a lot of fish on it, and you'll begin to love it like I do. It's my favorite bait.
You know, Bass Pro's come out with a tungsten tube weight. What this is actual tungsten ground up into rubber that gives it the weight. And this is a 1/4 ounce weight, and all you do is simply wet it and slide it in the end of your tube, and it forces all the way to the end. You can spray your scent, you can put scent up in there, anything you want to. And that weight is at the end of the tube. Then you just take your tube hook and slide it right through the tube and right through the end of the weight, bring it down, rig it up perfectly Texas style. What this does, it makes a tube fall in a natural horizontal position instead of getting your old nose dive like you used to. Plus you don't have a weight up here in front to stop your hook from coming out when you set the hook.
Fishing pressure can have a profound impact on a lot of bodies of water. And with as many anglers as there are on the water, it can be real tough. This week, Rick's going to talk to us about how to handle that pressure and still be successful. That's this week's Art of Angling.
Anyone who spends any amount of time on our waters nowadays has observed the ever-increasing fishing pressure. This brings us to a new frontier of awareness that we're going to have to be able to deal with that pressure and become a successful angler. First, though, I would like to point out that there is a misconception about fishing pressure, and that is that fishing pressure reduces the amount of fish in the lake. That may have been true in the old days, but really that is not true now, especially with catch and release. In fact, most lakes nowadays have just as many fish, if not more, than they had in the past. Back in the mid-'80s at Truman Reservoir, I was fishing a BASS tournament. I went back in this creek that I wanted to fish. I knew the kind of water I was going to fish, but when I got there was already 3 Bass Club guys and 3 boats going down this bank. And at first I got a little frustrated and I started to leave, and I said, no, I'm going to watch them for a few seconds. And what I observed was they were throwing jigs and spinnerbaits, which are very good techniques that time of year. But I didn't observe them catch any fish, which, you know, I figured, well, I'd watch them at least catch 1 or 2 fish if there was any active fish at all. Also what I did was to really observe what they were not doing. And a technique I like that same time of year, that mid to late spring, I like to fish shallow square bill crankbaits, and I didn't see them doing that. So after they left, I tied on one, I started down that bank. The very first log I come to, I catch a 5-pounder. The second log I come to, I seen them beat to death, I catch a 4-pounder. I knew then what I had to do to catch these fish. I ended up winning that tournament by almost 60 pounds for 3 days, simply by making a change, by observing what the locals were fishing and making a change away from that. Here is an example of individual pressure. I had found this spot, which really was one of those secret spots that most people evidently had never found. The first day I caught 24 pounds off from it. I was throwing a 6A bomber. I want to note here, 6A bombers have a rattle. The second day I caught 23 pounds off this spot, but I didn't catch near as many fish. I only in fact caught my limit and no more. So I was kind of worried going into the third day, even though I had a big lead, that I might have to do something different. I might have to change water, whatever, but I wasn't going to die on this spot if it wasn't going to produce fish. So I got there to the third day, I made 2 passes, did not get a single strike. I started to leave and said, no, I'm going to change baits. So I changed to a 7A shad wrap. After I did that, I made 2 more passes and I had the biggest catch of the whole tournament. I had a limit that weighed 28 pounds. Simply by making a lure change, I had changed this water back into essentially virgin water. Give the fish a different presentation, a different technique, a different lure.